Yeah.
So let me welcome everybody to the second Energy Transformation Hour. Bienvenidos a la hora transformación energética. These are done in English, but I figured I'd throw out the greeting in Spanish. Great guest this month is Ron Leonard. Ron is the CEO, chairman of the Renewable Energy Coalition. But he also has a long background in renewable energy, primarily, by far not exclusively, in the state of New York, founding Bioenergy Systems, which later went public as Bessie Corp, but also worked in, and actually Sunwise was another company, one of the first panel manufacturers in the United States, way back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And so Ron has seen it all come and go and has been an early proponent in the transformation of energy across the United States and the world, and has been involved in Puerto Rico, testifying before the PREB and looking to help businesses grow and see renewable energy finance projects get financed top to bottom. So there's a number of things that we'll talk about today, but Ron, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here next to the fire for the sparks.
The sparks, indeed. Indeed. So maybe, we're format of these things, maybe just quickly go over. Ron and I are gonna chat about a number of things that we've discussed and probably rediscuss and relitigate, but for the benefit, for maybe 30 minutes or so, and then we're going to open it up. We'd like to basically get a broader conversation going. There may be questions you have, there may be comments, there may be questions we have for you in the audience. We wanted to just flow sort of naturally after that. So I think maybe the first thing to get going, Ron, is we had the RFP come out this week, and you and I have been looking at that since it came out in draft form in January. And I'm on record as saying I think it's well, maybe not a total disaster, but it is very weak. It's a weak showing, and is not going to get people what they're looking for here in Puerto Rico. What say you?
Well, what say I is I wholeheartedly agree with your statement with a qualification. The idea of coming up with a lofty goal is always good, and shooting for the moon is great, but you basically should start out on solid ground. And PREPA is sort of shaky ground. The shake, rattle, and roll has to do with the fundamental backstop of capital that is necessary to get this done. We're talking well over $1 billion of money, and certainly, that's just the solar side. They need to have 500 megawatts of batteries, so you're kicking into the $2 billion range, and people have a problem understanding how a bankrupt entity can move that amount of capital forward and be a counterparty. In other words, be bankable. And the idea that we can build on that shaky base is probably the first mistake.
Yeah, I think that's true. We had that discussion about whether or not you should delay this until after there's either a direction out of bankruptcy, a debt deal, more certainty about the capabilities and abilities of PREPA as a counterparty. Certainly, you're going to get more interest and a better pricing for the proposals that you will get eventually.
Fundamentally, Puerto Rico has this thing called goodwill. And really, there is an industry goodwill for Puerto Acco, and that counts for something. One of my cohorts who's on this call, Lloyd Hofstetter, also has a history of acting and working in loving Puerto Rico. I first went there in the early 80s because a bank in Puerto Rico, Bank of San Juan, decided that they wanted to set up solar manufacturing. And they did that in the middle of the island in a place called Camarillo. And they made solar thermal collectors out of an invention that I had. And, ever since then, you got to love the place because the people have a will to move forward, will to see change, a hope that change will occur. And I think that's what this RFP shows, that there is some hope. There's some go forward measure.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The idea of putting out a target and doing an RFP for 3,000 plus megawatts and 1,500 megawatts of energy storage. I guess they didn't say it earlier, but apparently the target is 4 hours deep. So, I mean, this is a great thing, right? So this order from the PREB is a good thing. The question really arises in how is it being executed, and I think that's where we have our issues.
Yeah, I think the force of law is also a question that comes into play because, let's just make believe that the money is sitting there because functionally the federal money is sort of sitting there, and let's just do away with any possibility that there's a problem hooking up to a grid in Puerto Rico. The real issue, I guess, comes back to certain things, which is what's the basis of faith going forward? And one of the things that you look at in this whole process is what happened in the past. What happened in the past is that people under, I like to call him Governor Ricky because that's who he said to call him when I met him the first time. He put in a law that said that, boy, if you need to get out of this mess that we're in under the hurricane and get power, you can install a 25 kilowatt system on your home. And all you have to do is put in a stamped engineered drawing to prep, and it'll, put it in, we'll all work it out. So thousands of people did that. And at present, my sources tell me there is over 2,000 back applications sitting there waiting to be processed. And the excuse before this was, well, we didn't have the second meter to install. We really need that second meter to feed power back into the grid and monitor everything. But we found out that the second meters were sitting there. Then we found, well, we have to have an easy way of putting the applications in. Maybe they're getting lost in the mail or people don't want to come in. So they put a portal in place. Now the portal is in place. And there are 2 people working in that portal very diligently, but it's sort of a black hole. The project goes in, but nothing comes back out, and people are still sitting there waiting to be connected. Now that law that Governor Ricky put in place required them to process those forms in 30 days. Well, some of them are, I guess, 2 years old. Some were processed, some moved forward, but that force of law issue is something that you have to solve because it's not just faith, it's just not just hope in the future, it's factually the law is going to be followed.
Yeah, there's a conflict of agenda and a lack of a will to enforce the outcome on PREPA, and we see this a lot with different things in Puerto Rico, and it is things that I think we see slowly changing. But it's not just the interconnections and signing the drawings, right? I mean the net metering, right, which is kind of the second half of that, which is there have been people who've been connected, but their bills haven't been set up properly. So months and months they're not getting credit for the power that they're actually putting back. I mean, whether there's a meter or not. There was another issue I think you're aware of with the same portal. When they put the portal up after the hurricane, almost a year after the hurricane, the portal went up. That's great. In the meantime, they had actually approved several thousand connections of sub 25 kW. But then they made the companies who were waiting to install them at some point say, oh, no, you've got to go back and resubmit them on the portal. So even though they'd been submitted, approved without the portal, they forced people to go back and resubmit them. This sort of stalling tactic, I think I've seen it a lot, not just in Puerto Rico, around the world in systems in transition. And have you seen places where different things have been done to address this, be successful? What do you recommend?
Well, that's interesting, because the situation where I spent most of my life, all of my life in New York, sort of comes to mind. And I stupidly wasn't there that day, so they put me in charge of something, which was organize the New York State Solar Energy Industries Association. So I ended up doing that in 1994. And then again, wasn't there that day, so they put me on the committee to be the head of the GUI, sacrificial goat, who sat before the Public Service Commission for 2 years, one on the standard interconnection agreement, which is exactly what we're talking about, net metering. And that net metering bill and standard interconnection bill was fought vehemently for 2 years before the Public Service Commission. And even a year after it was passed and agreed to, we still had to have a lawyer sit there and send complaints to the guy who was in charge of the Public Service Commission. His name was fortuitous. His name was Paul Powers. And he would pick up the phone and yell at the utility. So, this is not unique. This is not something that's never occurred before in the world. And in fact, another law that was put out in Puerto Rico had to do with ESCOs recently. And it was, I think, the way I read it, overreaching, that, they had to review this and they had to see that piece of paper and figure out what your profit potential is and what occurred in New York, same problem with ESCOs, is that the Public Service Commission in New York essentially said to all the ESCOs, well, great, you want to give people a contract and you want to save on their energy, good, but the rule is that unless you sell them power cheaper than they can buy from the utility, because what was occurring in New York State was bait and switch, buy the ESCO account, 3 months later you're paying more than the utility bill that you would if you bought it from the local company, the local supplier of energy. And then if you wanted to get out of the contract, you had to pay an exit fee. So some of this has been litigated. Some of this has been done. All they have to do in Puerto Rico is to copy maybe New York's example. And one of the other examples that I think probably we should put forward that worked for New York and worked in a lot of different places, starting in California, is a green bank. A green bank is sort of a cat in the table. A green bank is a counterparty that can use the idea that funding is a fungible item, and that if you have somebody, someplace, somehow that's believable with the capital, you can have a backstop. You can have a guaranteed party that no matter what happens, even if PREPA doesn't want to do net metering, but if you hook up your system to net metering, you'll get paid. If you put in a megawatt worth of solar and it all works out and it's turned on and no one wants to honor the bill, you'll get paid. So this is a way of following the example of what works someplace else.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's a great segue, I think, to the green bank. I think we'll come back to some of the other questions about, how this RFP may affect things on the utility scale side going forward, but we've got some time. So I think the green bank in New York, you've been associated with that. I was an advisor in the earlier stages as they were setting it up. They have an ability to do a lot more. One of the things they didn't have to do directly with this green bank in New York is what you're talking about now, is effectively providing an instrument to create a counterparty payment guarantee. right? So we can eliminate a lot of the risks, not just of PREPA under, say, the larger contracts, but just that that the system moves smoothly in the interim, giving confidence to people who would spend their time, installing, selling, operating these different systems, and help it transition. That's a great role for a green bank in Puerto Rico. I guess the analogy in New York might be some of the programmatic systems that the Green Bank has helped support in terms of like home weatherization and things like that, that carry a level of uncertainty or risk or lack of familiarity, but with the Green Bank there to provide that level of support for financing, payment, et cetera, you can do more with it. What else would you see a green bank potentially doing in Puerto Rico?
Well, besides being a backstop, there is a real issue of trust from the federal government. And how does that apply here? Well, let's just look at one little piece of it. There was a fund established by Congress, billions of dollars. And one small part of that was $300 million that was allocated already. And that money was supposed to go to small solar projects and homes to be rebuilt and weatherization and other good stuff, things that really support the common man. And these projects, the blue roof projects, you've all seen the blue roofs in Puerto Rico that should really have been removed and turned into real roofs. Well, good news. The blue roofs have partially been solved. 250 of them have been repaired in the last 4 years. But we're guaranteed that 5,000 of them are going to be finished by the end of this summer. Well, history tells us that that didn't work out too well, and federal money is involved here, so we should really make sure that is used correctly. The Green Bank could be the entity that sort of sits back and says, what's going on here? We don't have it. There's a disconnect. There's money to be used. People are in need. How can we make those two things fit together? And contractors can be engaged. Resources can be applied. Consultants can be used. This is a conduit of more expertise than just transferring dollars back and forth.
Yeah, and I think that the program that you were talking about, that the 300 million, and at one point it was 375 and other things, they've actually
450 started, but that's a whole other story.
they've combined that into what they call the CEWRI program that they've got out now. I know that the money was supposed to be for low and middle income, and originally through a program. I'll have to say, I actually, though I'm not a big fan about the way they're executing this, they could do better. I actually think doing it this way and putting it out there probably makes a lot more sense for organization. And it's going to take 3 years, right? Getting the roofs and the solar and other things done. But if you think about that, that's 15,000 installs. You're talking about just this program alone is probably tripling, maybe more, the number of crews that we're going to have doing, whatever you call it, 2 houses a day kind of thing per crew. That's a lot of people that aren't currently employed in solar. And, as a program, you might actually see it cannibalize some, existing stuff because of the minimum levels of wages and other things, but it is undeniably a big boost once it gets going to the growth of the solar industry in Puerto Rico.
And there's 2,000 entities that reside in Puerto Rico that have been submitted as solar companies, and I don't think they're all gainfully employed, but there is a more important number that was done by the University of Mayagüez that indicated that over 200,000 homes in Puerto Rico will never be serviced properly by the current grid. And that's an unfortunate situation. It took some of them almost a year to get power back on after that terrible hurricane hit the island. And I just, don't understand how people survived. Well, A lot of them didn't survive after that event because they didn't have basic needs served. So if we can show that those people's needs will be met by a build back of the grid, and the grid will be built back in a way that can accept renewable energy, well, that will give a path forward. And I think that's part of the process here. If we're going to, have billions of dollars spent on a grid upgrade, and I'm listening to discussions 2 days ago on microgrids and what the valuation of microgrids are and where they should go and how the dollars should be allocated and who's on first, what's the first thing we should do. Well, all these things are possible if we have independent arbiters there, people who don't have their interest sort of compromised by whatever decision is being made, that they make the decision purely on the basis of what the public should be getting as a good return on their dollar. And I think that's probably the other good feature that we should encourage in Puerto Rico, some faith that something is being done for the general population, something is being done in a way that can't be compromised.
Absolutely, absolutely. And do you think? Sorry, we were still on the green bank, and I think we got into more details.
Well, the green bank would be part of a solution, but only if you can combine that with a sort of independent board, which the green bank represents, and that board independence, I think, is something that could be used to allocate the vast amount of capital that Congress has been authorizing in Puerto Rico. Recently before Trump left, I think he put 10 billion in. There's probably another 20 billion left to be allocated and located in Puerto Rico by Congress. Well, all that capital is a massive amount of funds. And whether we think FEMA is capable of figuring this out or some other entity locally in Puerto Rico is capable of allocating the funding, we probably should have a high-level overview of all that capital. We should probably have a public way of showing how people can benefit from that. We proposed something that was done in New York to be done in Puerto Rico. In New York, my friend Tria Case put in this thing called the NY Solar Map. It's done about a decade ago, and it worked out really well because it gave anybody the ability to look on the internet, see their house or their business, and plop down some solar and actually use a heat map, which is the thing that shows any of the shading that would be there that would block the solar, and get an economic analysis and show how this is possible to do. But it also showed every single solar system that was installed in New York State. It showed the places in New York State that are critical infrastructure that need to have power. And if you look at the prsolarmap.com, you will see the similar aspirational location where we'd like to see the same thing occur there. Because unless this whole process is done in a public manner, in a way that shows people that they're engaged, as in, what's in it for me? Well, what the heck are we doing here? How's it going to help my life? Unless we can show that very important feature of this is great for us geeks to talk about solar energy, but the general public doesn't understand all of that. It understands that I can get reliable power. The bill isn't going to constantly going up year in and year out. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to feel good about what I'm buying because this shows that clean energy is possible, that we're not going to have to spend, Puerto Rico is spending $2 billion a year importing fossil fuels. Well, if you continue to do that, how do you pay down your debt? Doesn't work out too well.
Well, or how do you invest in new infrastructure, right? I mean, being prepared. Well, right now you've got government money. Eventually, government money is going to end.
Right.
Yeah, and there are there are problems with large amounts of stimulus, like we're talking about here. It's good to have the money. It becomes a bigger problem if you try and put it in too fast, right? Small hole, difficulty, getting things in, taking away restrictions and other things to get the money to move faster. You're opening the door wider to misuse, fraud, theft, other types of things that you're trying to avoid. So there's an interesting balance that has to be put together. But just the fact of the stimulus, the money coming in, provides a certain level of assurance to your private sector capital that you can begin to aggregate around the market and around different things in the market in anticipation of that.
I think the second word in green bank, the bank portion of it, is also important, because if you just use public capital, well, something may occur that's always occurred in the past. And I saw it first in Haiti, where if a project is just gifted, just slapped on the ground, well, a couple of years later, it stops working. Well, who owns it? Who's responsible for it? Why is it going to be kept up? And we saw that in Vieques, where they put in a large solar system in a field, and pretty soon the horses were in the field and they kicked in the solar panels and broke the wires, and the thing didn't work. So this public-private capital is what the Green Bank is all about merging. It's about being there to assure that there is reasonableness, that there's a backstop, there's somebody's watching the nickels and dimes, but it's there to provide a connection to large amounts of private capital, which is what's needed to build back the economy in Puerto Rico. And the economy is part and parcel of this energy picture, because when you look at the big industries there, whether it's medical or aerospace or electronics or fintech, or I don't know, probably in this day and age, we should look at pharmaceuticals, because that's the biggest employer in Puerto Rico, besides the federal government or the state government, is a pharmaceutical company. I talked to the CEO of the pharmaceutical company last year, and he said, well, we love renewable energy. We put a big solar farm right in front of our building, and it's great, works. But when the power goes down, people don't generally realize this. A solar system has an inverter, and the inverter disconnects when the power goes off. It just shuts everything down as a safety measure. So that didn't do them any good. And when that power went off after the hurricane, they lost millions of dollars. And his buddy, the CEO of the actual company in France, was also there, and I discussed that with them. And they had to have a contingency problem. They had to have the medical goods that they manufactured, but they couldn't just rely on Puerto Rico to be the sole source anymore. So that gave some uncertainty in their business and caused them consternation. But if we are going to improve the grid and say underground the lines, which we were talking about 2 days ago, to all those pharmaceutical companies, that undergrounding says that the power could stay on, but it only could stay on if they had a power source that could provide the power. So you can have distributed amounts of power, many different places producing clean energy, thus having redundancy, thus having a grid that works in both directions, thus having a reason to upgrade the grid. So all of this is connected. Do not put the horse before the cart. Figure out what your resources are, do an analysis, and then spend the dollars equitably.
Yeah, you raise a couple of interesting points there. I think in that too many people tend to focus on the price of power in Puerto Rico, and not really the reliability and the quality of the power. And that you talk about it affecting companies, but it actually affects the common and the low and middle income people more. You've also talked about undergrounding lines. Undergrounding lines is a great idea, right? Through key areas, et cetera. But it's not the solution to reliable power and continuity of power delivery. What it helps you do is get the system back up faster when you do have breaks, because you don't have to repair quite as many of them in key locations where you're moving a consistent amount of power, which means that for the pharmaceutical companies, the power of the system goes down. They should expect to be able to get back up in a relatively short period of time, because the key high voltage networks from the plants, once they're up to their locations, will work first. That's great, but it's a partial solution, and it's important, but it doesn't quite get all the way there. I think the transformation and the issues that we're looking at here for reliability is, then moves on to issues of social justice and energy justice and equity, and this is another area where a green bank could play a very big role by supporting. Not by making direct loans to small guys, but by supporting the creation of an infrastructure of leasing companies and lenders and others, by helping them set up, providing a certain amount of capital, but creating this infrastructure that unfortunately doesn't exist in Puerto Rico. In California, you want to get a solar system, you've got 20 different loans to choose from, 10 different people who offer you a PPA. There's an incredible amount of personal and commercial finance that, from a market development perspective, Puerto Rico is lacking. A green bank, at least in relation to infrastructure, maybe it's an infrastructure bank because there's probably more to do, can really do that in a way that can be very effective. And I mean, the New York Green Bank has actually done that in a way, right, where you had specialty finance and delivered, programmatic ability to finance, weatherization in your home. It came down to there's almost no credit check. They do look at property values, they do look at a few other things, but basically, if you're improving the value of your home, you're improving the system by putting in insulation, windows, solar system could be, generator. They have programs that they've backstopped and got going to actually fund that. So they've created an ability to bring private capital into infrastructure.
And I think they've done something important. They focused capital. So there's a lot of cooperative co-op banks in Puerto Rico. What we found was that they all had a different document that was used to get a solar loan. So that's a problem. And there was a different rate, and there are different standards. And if they all felt that if they adopted the standard that the Green Bank said was reasonable, and that if things failed, the Green Bank would help them out, well, in that case, maybe they could have an easier time making those loans. And there's a funny short story that is, I know somebody in Puerto Rico who's been doing this for decades. It's a family business. They actually manufacture solar systems, thermal solar systems in Puerto Rico, the most likely solar system that anybody's familiar with in Puerto Rico. And they've actually helped fund them over the years. And their loan loss rate, which is something you understand, has been less than 1%. And if somebody messed up and forgot the payment and they send somebody out there, oh, yes, here's the money. No problem. No question, because people are proud of that. They're excited that they're self-sufficient, and that social justice thing is very important, because if you look at an electricity bill for someone who doesn't make over $20,000 a year, which is certainly the case in many places in Puerto Rico, they're paying a disparagingly large amount of their yearly salary on energy costing them over 20 cents a kilowatt hour. So if they can save something on that energy, that puts money back into not only their pocketbook, but the economy. And I just mentioned an important figure, that guy who's been doing solar energy in his family business for decades in Puerto Rico. He's a manufacturer of solar systems, and they're manufacturing them in Puerto Rico, and they're creating jobs. And those jobs create economy, and those economic benefits flow forward into many, many businesses locally. So this is a good thing for lots of reasons, besides the fact that it eliminates importing lots of fossil fuel that pollutes the air and the water. It creates local economic benefits.
Absolutely. So I think I want to throw out one last sort of question, and then I think we'll get everybody else involved here. Yeah. Really, the regulator, right? So I think, I mean, I'll say, and I think others on this call, I think that under difficult circumstances, I think the regulator has actually done a very good job. They're finding their feet. They don't have nearly enough resources. They have a long list of things they have to do. They've only been in existence for 6.5 years. And frankly, they're creating policy that's going to influence policies that happen in the rest of the world. How do you think they're doing? Do you think they're where would you like to see them change their priorities? Let's put aside the RFP because we'll come back to that. But yeah, what do you think? How have you think? What would you like to see them raise the priority on?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned. I sat before the Federal Oversight Management Board last February and testified about the process. And what I noticed before I got up there with my friend and talked is they asked the right questions. They asked the hard questions, and they asked in a very inclusive way for help. What should we be doing? And I think that cooperative process of that back and forth is, it suggests to me that they'll be successful. And in terms of that, that priority process really should probably go back to the law. If the law, Article 17, says that you have a certain date to create renewable energy 60% by, I guess, 2030, well, you should start from that end and back it up and figure out what is necessary to do on a yearly basis to reach that end goal. So if I was a regulator and I was interested in meeting a goal, I would start with the end result and come up with a schedule that's hard to beat. And that hard to beat schedule can be done in a way that makes sense because there is federal funding, because there are local players that are honest and are willing to devote resources. But everything is based on the fact that there is a rule of law and people buy into it. And I think that is their real goal. That is their real role in this process. They can't solve all problems. They can't fix it with a switch turned on and off, but they can provide the role of public discourse. They can show by example that this can be done on this time, under budget, and it'll benefit you. That, I think, is probably the best thing that they can do to make this happen. And I see people that are really engaged in a way that goes beyond just their job. They're engaged in a vision that they have. And I think that vision can be brought forward as long as people have the faith that we're doing this for them.
Terrific. So why don't we open this up? Ron and I might like to ask you guys a few questions. Go ahead and turn on your videos if you want to share your smiling faces. You can write your questions in the chat, but we're a nice tight group here, which is what we're trying to achieve. So we're happy to enter into conversations, get you to ask. Of course, CP. Take yourself off mute. What did I say?
Do we have a weekly therapy session with CP about all these issues? And he feels much better after we discuss it and solve all the problems of the world. It's a great thing.
It's the cheapest mental health program that I've ever seen before, you know.
So I promised CP that I would introduce him to the head of a New York agency, the New York Power Authority. And the New York Power Authority is now engaged in Puerto Rico. And that's probably a good thing in that they've been there since the first hurricane and done an analysis in depth of things that are necessary to get the power going. You know, like all the substations, the 330 substations that move power out into the distribution grid. And the distribution grid is quite interesting in Puerto Rico because you have 4 different voltages in the distribution grid.
Yep.
So if you look at any of the poles up on the top of the street, you'll notice there are 3 lines on there. And in Puerto Rico, the standard distribution grid in most of the United States is 13.2 kVA. Only 30% of Puerto Rico's grid is at that voltage. And the interesting part is only one of those 3 legs is monitored. So it's hard for you
I
to
didn't
get
know that.
power. Yeah, it's hard for you to get power if you only have 1 in 3 chances knowing that something's wrong out there. And that's the role of somebody like the New York Power Authority. They can help people like CP get the existing resource going, the existing resource being a hydro facility. And there's multiple hydro facilities. There are resources in Puerto Rico besides sunlight. There's wind, there's hydro, there's biomass. All of these things can be tied together and form a really resilient grid, a grid that benefits local people, creates jobs. And, you know, I think guys like CP can push the agenda.
I was just thinking that one of the neat things with like Ron is when you listen to him and of course his extensive in-depth knowledge on all these topics, you know, for us that have been fighting in the weeds on what I would call like, you know, I don't know, let's call it electricity 101, kind of like, how do we get this shit going up and running? He almost sounds like a voice from the future. And I have to say with today's background with the Northern Lights and that plasma, he definitely seems like he's a voice that's coming from the future of where Puerto Rico needs to be.
Well, actually, I'm a voice of the past in some sense because I am a pioneer. And I can show that by the spears and arrows sticking out of my back. I've been there, done that. And you know, I've made all the mistakes that are possible to make. So I would like for that not to happen again and for this to go smoothly. And it really can go smoothly. And my real hope in my heart, my real hope is that we can use Puerto Rico as an example how to fix the grid everywhere, including New York. Because this could be the shining example of how a transformational process can work smoothly. And that even if you have a dysfunctional power of producer of electricity, oh, I don't know, like Texas, for example, that people do not have to sit back and take bad service for granted, take the idea that I'm going to have to pay more every year for a commodity that really doesn't serve my needs. Well, at a certain point, and I bet you it's going to occur in Texas, people will vote with their feet. And they're going to decide that, you know, I don't really need to buy all that stuff from that utility anymore. I'm going to put a solar system on my house and put a battery in my basement and say, aloha. And certainly in Hawaii, they aloha that a lot. And they have 40% of their power probably from small systems. So there is a way out. But the smartest way out is to use the existing infrastructure and provide reliable power.
Yeah, Hawaii is a great study in that, right? Because when they tried to put a halt to permits for solar, the black market kept chugging. People were paying and having solar installed. And when they tried to enforce, against the rogue electricians and other people who were putting this stuff in, the people basically rose up and said, and the politicians looked at their voters and said, it's okay.
The old phrase in New York that covers that, which is, how's that working out for you?
Exactly. So there was an expression much used in Puerto Rico that I still like, which after the hurricanes was, ask for forgiveness, not permission. Right. And I still think that should be applied wherever it can be. But as things are getting normalized and the stakes are going up, you want to limit that to small things. Maybe not quite the way that the new fortress decided to bypass. Admittedly, totally gray, right? I mean, their interpretation is an absolutely fine one. Yeah. The real difficulty, and quite rightly, as people are pointing the fingers, is kind of back at PREPA and the regulator and others, is if this was a gray area and you were buying something from them, it would have been in your best interest to require them to get a ruling first. Right. But as it works out, I mean, I think it probably works out. They'll end up with a fine if the FERC decides they've got jurisdiction. Sure. Yeah. Sure. CP.
So just share a little bit of that continuation of it's easier to seek forgiveness. We'll add on one caveat in a bit of local baseball here. So Casa Pueblo, which many of you probably know, they were recently cited in a querella, in a complaint against Casa Pueblo as the contractor and Maximo Solar as the contractee and Maximo Solar as the contractor, for having 12 people not qualified, no electrician on site while they've been installing this much to do microgrid for the center of Adjuntas. So this is let's call it, this is like inside the island. This is an area where this is within our service area. In fact, Adjuntas is viewed as our service area. And this project has never smelled right from the beginning. It was kind of run by Casa Pueblo, which Casa Pueblo kind of has their fingers in a whole bunch of things, but more than anything, they're really about marketing themselves. And I think they bit off too much, because they were like, hey, we're going to energize the center of this of our plaza. All these businesses will have solar systems. So they got the solar panels. They even got batteries donated, which is kind of a neat. It's the Riven battery repurposed to then provide storage, quite a bit of storage for the center of the project. Sounds good, but and me and my team, we would look through the official records. We never saw any registration of this entity in the Department of State of Puerto Rico. We never saw any registration in a municipality. We never saw any registration or any motions with the Energy Bureau. And then and thankfully to Frances, who's the president of the Colegio de Peritos, the College of Electricians, College, for lack of a better word. Terrible translation. I do bad translations, English to Spanish and Spanish to English. So you're going to get bad translations anyways out of me. But in this case, it's from the Electricians College, and she's the president. And Casa Pueblo's answer was typical Casa Pueblo, which is like, how dare you cite this? These are 3 women working here. And, why would you file a complaint for these 3 women that are installing? When have you ever taken care of these other complaints against violence against women? So it is literally a classic logical fallacy to mix 2 completely separate things.
Equivalence.
Exactly, a false equivalence. Thank you, Ron. That is actually one of, I think, 14 logical errors in argumentation you can make. They went for number 1, false equivalence. And except for the fact that the president, Frances, is a woman, And she comes back on Facebook and comes back with a press release. This is not about women. This is about you had 12 installers, no electricians, and you're supposed to have one electrician, certified electrician, for every 9 installers. And by the way, none of your installers are. So here's an example of asking permission after the fact, and how in this case there's a lot of blowback, and of course it makes all of these renewable projects, you know, just look a little bit more out of reach, because for most people in the mountain, they're like, well, I just want to put a system on my rooftop, but then I don't have the money for the electrician, I don't have the money for this and that and this, and if Casa Pueblo can't even do this, how am I ever going to do this? Of course, our answer from the cooperative is you do it right, and you do it right from the beginning. You go through all the steps. You start with, you know, you go with the Energy Bureau, you get yourself organized, you get everything legally taken care of, you get proper engineering studies done, and you make sure that the right people are qualified when they do the job. And that's how you avoid it. But it does explain why they were able to make so much more faster progress on this than we have. And we were scratching our heads thinking, how are they doing this? And now we have the answer. They haven't done anything. They haven't registered anything. They haven't done anything legally. They don't even have the installation illegal, and they put people at risk, which is ultimately the real problem. So just share that little tidbit of inside baseball.
Innovation.
There's definitely some interpolitical dynamic subtext there as well. But yeah, I mean, there is, you know, there's this guilt, right? The peritos electricistas, and you know, they don't want to lose control of things. Yes, things need to be done, but if they needed something public that they could make a statement on, this is a perfect example. I think it's probably unfortunate that, you know, it is a group that has trained a lot of women to join the solar industry, because it opens up, you know, that angle of attack. Was it a soft target? You know, did they do this on purpose? You know, it's unfortunately these arguments are going to be made, rather than focusing on you know, regulations following safety, and, you know, are they too onerous, right? Should we reform and, you know, put something in place that allows for training and expansion, and, you know, these things to go ahead more swiftly? I mean, you know, it would be nice if you didn't have to jump through as many hoops as you've had to jump through to get to want to do what you want to do. Yeah.
And Tom and Ron, did you guys talk much about the RFP? I mean, I had to take a call in between there, so
we thought we'd probably come back to it. I noticed that, and because, well, for example, Jean David wasn't on, and he's on now. Maybe John, you wanna show us your smiling face, and as a developer of systems in Puerto Rico, I'm sure you've got an opinion or two to share.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
we can.
I was enjoying my.
Don't hit anybody.
I'm on the road, so that's why I was just listening, but a pleasure to be here. And yeah, like Tom said, I wasn't on the call when you guys were covering the RFP, so that will be interesting to touch on.
Yeah, we kind of skated past it. I think most of you know, it came out this week, the formal RFP. The draft came out in January and was provided to the PREB. There was a hearing, I think all of us were at. I didn't talk at the hearing, but I think several people did, Ron, I think, included. We then, there's a separate group that is organized through the Invest Puerto Rico. We actually studied it, picked a handful of kind of bigger issues with it, and wrote a letter that I think was made public to the PREB and to PREPA, you know, talking about these inconsistencies and, you know, why they're going to drag this down and cause it to fail. And 2 weeks went by, 3 weeks went by, whatever it was. I've read it again. I I didn't notice anything in there that they adapted. I think they may have stretched out the response timeline a little bit, but by and large, all of the incredibly short-sighted, let's just get this crap out let's just get this nice RFP out the door and get some good. I mean, they're getting good publicity until I get my op-ed published. But
yeah, they're going to get publicity. Yeah.
I've got a guy trying to place an op-ed in different places, so we'll see how we get it. It's very similar to what I wrote earlier and put online. But what can I say? John, you can tell me, but I don't know of any developer company in Puerto Rico that has a tangible net worth of $75 million. And I don't know, and by the way, this isn't even one of the subjects that we covered when we talked about
it wasn't.
The thing.
Because it wasn't in there originally.
I didn't think so, because I was beating myself up and I was saying, how did I miss this?
Man, and the other thing is that at the hearing that the Energy Bureau had about this same thing, where I'm just like, didn't they want to include any of the recommendations, comments, questions, any of the things that the commissioners actually asked? It was just like, I thought it was just a big middle finger to the Energy Bureau and ultimately to the people of Puerto Rico, because my translation of that RFP is very simple. Puerto Ricans, you can do the work, you can do the labor, you just never can own or develop any energy projects in Puerto Rico. And that's a very, very sad comment.
Yeah, and
that's very true.
You know how insane this is? Well, first of all, it demonstrates a total lack of understanding of how any of this stuff happens. But that kind of stuff that would never appear in a PG&E or any of the others wouldn't put a limit of $75 million. And these guys are utilities with A ratings, and they benefit from having strong counterparties under the contracts that they have. They know. I could talk about this forever, but and then the bid security, right? They didn't change the bid security. That's another thing. Yeah. Bid security is a good thing, but it needs to be in reasonable amounts, and it should be in two steps, right? One, really up front. And this is another stupid thing. As long as you've got $75 million in the bank and no claims on it, you can put in a proposal. In fact, you can put in 3 free. but then you have to pay for it. And if they say that they're going to review, right? Not that they've accepted your proposal and invite you to negotiate a contract, then you have to put up $10,000 per megawatt, right? So it's just you put up a hundy with the storage, and you got to put up $1 million just to negotiate a PPA, right? So this is anybody in the any rational developer, even if BlackRock decides they want to do this, and they can certainly demonstrate that. They're never going to do that, right? They didn't provide the PPA, as we talked about, right? Provide a form of PPA. People have to know what it is they're getting into, right? Ask people to mark it up. That puts you as the counterparty in a competitive position, because if you force them to mark up the PPA when they have to compete against what other people may offer, it forces them to be more reasonable in their requests for things in the PPA. Now, in this case, you're not going to get much because there are so many other uncertainties. But clearly, there's a lack of appropriate thought. And then, of course, the one that we mentioned at the beginning that you were talking about, Ron, is you got a bankrupt counterparty, and you're not telling people what it is you're going to do about it, right? Even if you're not bankrupt, you think about this from the point of view. In my blog, I talked about Puerto Rico taking its place somewhere between Burkina Faso and North Korea as a place for if they issued this RFP. Well, they're there now. But even if you were trying to do something, Power Africa, got a friend who works Power Africa. She puts these things together. She's Puerto Rican, by the way. She's terrific. We're gonna get her on here.
Wow.
If the country or the utility puts out an RFP, they say basically put out the structure. How do we know we're going to get paid? Well, the government's going to put up an escrow fund of such and such, and we're going to direct all of the funds that are collected from the different individuals into a lockbox account, and we're going to have a waterfall. So you do it, or we're going to put in place an OPIC guarantee for this, and you've already got that agreed. They do nothing. They put out the RFP and they're basically asking people to come up with ideas about what they can do, right?
Yeah,
no one in their right mind.
I really thought
that's
this
crazy.
was a pick your brain RFI.
Perfect.
That would then result with some rational purpose going forward. But
That's what we recommended.
Yeah.
It was suggested by the oversight board, by the way. The oversight board on their last communication to the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau recommended that instead of an RFP, first you do some sort of an RFI, maybe some sort of an RFQ, and then you go for the RFP, which makes sense. And also the fact that it's open to all kinds of technologies can also make it difficult for them. It's great. It's great in a way, but from an evaluation standpoint, I think it's, considering the party we're talking about, I don't know if it's going to be efficient at all. And they did not define what they think it's about a virtual power plant. They do not give the financial from a credit worthiness off taker. The details are not there. Apparently they have preferred interconnection standpoints and they refuse to share those until the last minute, and that's going to have its own effect on the overall project cost by itself on top of all the other efficiencies. So yeah, I don't know. I saw Tom the other day. He made a comment about how bad the process was, and I reached out to him just to pick his brain. And I've seen very little coverage in the media, by the way, considering how ambitious the RFP is. I am surprised of how little coverage it's had. And I also, knowing the people in the sector, big and small players, I honestly, I think it hasn't attracted the amount of reputable developers / financier that normally a process as big as and as ambitious as this one would normally have.
So is this put out to attract a nation state? Is that what this is about? I mean, there's a lot of speculation as to who could respond to this. Who?
Yeah.
If you have unlimited capital, a nation state, then it doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, perfidy or incompetence, right? It's but there's a historical sport, not just in Puerto Rico, but basically speculating on what's the scam, right? who is it that they're trying to, and because this looks like it, right? You said it at 75 million. It's like there's somebody out there, they're trying to eliminate everybody else just so we can give it to these guys because they're the only ones who qualify. And while I can't rule that out entirely, I really think it's more incompetence, right? Because if you think about it as well, the way that all of this stuff runs, I mean, all the rest of this stuff could be perfect, and we'd still come back to a problem because you have to have site control, right?
But you know who recommended that? In a way, I would say if the consultants, Sargent and Lundy, would not be there, I would believe the incompetency side of things. But I don't think that's the case, because if you look at what's happening with the so-called legacy projects, the 16 projects that are being renegotiated, and these are projects that were awarded back in 2010, and because of the whole bankruptcy and various other things, they have not actually, because of financial offtake situation. Those projects had been renegotiated for 3 or 4 times. And at the last minute, the FOMB, the oversight board decided to
Yep.
impose all these financial requirements, which in essence are exactly the same requirements that are being imposed in the RFP. So there you see exactly where the requirements are coming from. And in my opinion, they just want to wipe out any possibilities for local people to be involved in the development or long-term ownership of these facilities.
Yeah, I think I think there's some truth to that, right? I think they stepped in politically to put pressure on the government of Puerto Rico to respond faster and you get the debt deal done, right? Try and cut through it. It didn't work. It's probably maybe a handful of those projects probably should have been renegotiated again, but or something should be done in order to think about a dropping in cost when things revert. But the reason they pulled it is not a good one. Now, in terms of some of the things that are creeping in here, in terms of the $75 million minimum, I don't necessarily see that tracking back to the requirements that they put on these things. I think there's different people, like having site control. That's normal, right? Normally people entering into a bid submission, they must have site control. It's usually evidenced by a lease option, right, which you pay a little bit for to the landowner, and you lock that up for a reasonable amount of money. It's positioned someplace where you've already done at least a preliminary studies on what the interconnection point is, how much it costs to get there. Whoops.
That was me.
Ron's showing his technical prowess by logging in on another account and putting it on audio.
I'm worried the battery's going to run out.
All right, I put you on mute there, so if you have to switch from one to the other, just take yourself off mute.
How deep, I guess, Tom, the question is, how deep do you guys want your conspiracy theories? Because I was told that the $75 million was actually to prevent the same scandal that happened under Governor Fortunio, where they had no requirements. So everybody and their brother got into the project, and they started selling projects back and forth, basically, that were unrevenuable. And that was one. I think James, Jim, can you do better on that conspiracy theory?
No. I mean, this could be, I'll base my 10 cents is, in the frustration after Hurricane Maria, when we're sitting here waiting for things to happen and get rebuilt and reading the press and everything, there was something that rings a bell about the 75 million is that the companies FEMA would only allow companies that had that $75 million account would qualify to enter the rebuilding process. And in my 30 years experience with the local government on contracts and everything, there's a lot of cut and paste going on. And they could easily just taken that stipulation and put it in there and, establish kind of a benchmark of who they want to deal with. That's just, again, my 10 cents worth, but it really rang a bell, that number. I looked through all my files and all my newspaper cuttings and all the things that I had for the last 3 years. And I didn't find it, but I'm going to keep looking.
Yeah,
we are going to request
definitely makes sense.
a hearing. We're actually going to request a hearing with the board of directors of PREPA because of this, because it prevents us from participating. We want to create a VPP for our service area. We want to incorporate, several sources of renewable energy and storage, and do that for our service area. And because of that limit, we're out. So we're actually, I'm literally, I've already got the letter prepared, and we're going to fire it off to the secretary to request a hearing to highlight that unless they modify that, they're going to have the unintended consequence of cutting out local Puerto Ricans. And I'm just going to use that line, you think it's okay for people to do the work, but not own it and run it. And I think that's a terrible precedent.
I do too. They gave it no thought, right? They picked a number and they put it in there, and realistically, for bids and things, you don't need it. You would eventually put some sort of a net worth test to some extent on the ultimate owners longer term of the facilities that get put in. It's just good practice.
Based on the size of the project. They have a
Yeah.
minimum size of the
Yeah.
project of 5 megawatts, but you got to have 75 million net
Right.
in resources. I mean, how about a little like alignment there? We have a project for 11 megawatts. Do we still need 75 megawatts of net resources?
I think there's a quick path forward for available to you, CP. That maybe isn't the best for the market as a whole, but I think you can probably convince them they should exempt any registered energy service provider from the 75 million. And as a registered energy service provider, I think you should get in. So that might be an easy political fix, and that would help you directly. I think they need to think more about it, right? Because 75 million and you know, for a VPP in particular, we said specifically separate them, right? Have you know, different RFP, different rules, you know, different types of things, because the evaluation is fundamentally different. You know, you're talking about, God, the VPPs are probably best set up as like a tolling agreement, right? I mean, where you build and maintain the facility, and you know, they basically can charge, discharge, et cetera, at an efficiency rate, and they pay you a monthly fee that gives you a return. And then, you know, there's penalties if you don't, which could just be a reduction in that monthly fee. I mean, from a risk standpoint, setting up the VPPs can be very simple, but yeah.
And I want to apologize to Gene. I think Gene was going to say something.
Yeah, please.
We need a new conspiracy.
It's QAnon.
Was that me? No. I mean, there's, you know, probably want to hear your thoughts on why do you think it's about process beyond what we all know, which is, you know, lack of creditworthiness, lack of definitions for what they really want and where they want it and when they want it. It's a very long and ambitious process based on what they have said. It's supposed to be 6 tranches. We also, tranche number 1 on the PPA. I think you made a comment earlier, Tom, and they did include a PPA with the RFP package, and I've seen the renegotiated PPAs for the legacy solar power plants, and it seems to be very similar, actually. So it seems like they want to be aligned, standardize those documents, including financial requirements and impositions from the Fiscal and Oversight Management Board.
Okay,
Who will really be in a position to actually come and kill the game with a process like this, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't a PPA included with the original one. I did notice that I think it's Exhibit D or Schedule D. It called it the PPA, but then when I went there, it just says, you know, attached. So the electronic version, it wasn't clear to me whether you were supposed to attach a form of PPA with your submission, or whether you were supposed to mark one up, or whether it was just there as an exhibit. And I don't recall. Yes, I did not read the whole 79 pages. I did not recall a section where they required you to mark up their form of PPA. I could have missed it, but if it is in there, that's at least one thing that has in their favor. But no, look, I don't see anything. This is going to fail, right? I don't know anybody worth 75 million.
What would that mean?
Are they going to get any bids? Are they getting any qualified bids? Right? Well, other than say non-qualified bids, maybe by the people who have those PPAs and already have site control, and some of them have technically have interconnection agreements, right? The risk or the expense of throwing in a non-qualifying bid on your property that, you know, where you haven't been able to move your PPA forward. Other than that group, I don't know who is going to spend their resources, their money getting up to speed, you know, where they're worth 75 million. If they're worth 75 million, they got other things to do. You know,
well, I would
right?
say,
I mean,
if you can submit a bid, I think the real risk is not, I think there's going to be bids. People are going to bid on some projects. And then what's going to happen, in my opinion, will be that we don't know if the project proponents are going to be in a position to actually finance those projects, and that's worse because everyone's going to be under the impression that they achieved something when, practically speaking, we'll see. We'll see what's going to happen. Very few groups, I will say, are in a position to maybe do in-house equity, for example, and that's a different ball game. I don't think that's what they're looking for. The Energy Bureau, PREPA, and all the groups, because there's a lot of demands, even regardless of the creditworthiness of the utility these days, which is odd.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very absurd.
But by any reasonable objective measure, I don't see how this could be anything other than a failure. I mean, if I'm them and I get a bid in or two, or I get the guys with existing projects to throw things in, even though they're not qualified, I'd declare victory. But I think by any objective measure, they're not going to come close to what they expect. We've gone around this so many times, but I guess more longer term, do you think that this is going to materially negatively impact the perception and the ability of Puerto Rico to get anything done this year or next year? I know investors. I know the guys that are there. I know that they have short memories, right? So if they do fix things, if they come out with better bids in the future, and PREPA is out of bankruptcy, then there will be a rush and all will be forgiven. But I mean, what do you see? What does anybody see?
I think the moment is now. I think the moment is now. PREPA went through a very bad time about 10 years ago, regardless of whether those contracts were awarded, which I agree with CP, Smith, and Jim. The way that the pre-qualification was made before the award of those projects, there was a lot of corruption. A lot of those projects didn't make it. What happened after is that a lot of those people actually were trying to flip those projects to reputable developers and financiers. Yeah. So those people came in, they lost money. So now you start a process like this and you do it wrong again. And this time, supposedly with expert consultants helping you throughout the way. I don't know. It's a hard sell for a third time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those are my 10 cents. This is do or die.
It's because we're, at the end of the day, we're dealing with the independent island of PREPA. It really has its own laws, its own regulations, and they're going to do what they want to do. And then we're all kind of left scratching our heads, wondering why.
Ron, if you want to turn that one off, you have to turn the speaker off on your computer. That's what's giving you the feedback. There we go. Yeah. So, transformation. It's easy, right? What about maybe actually, let me just check the time here.
About 6 minutes.
Oh, yeah, we're this was fun. We just got into it here. Anything that you guys want to ask us? Ron, is there anything you want to ask anybody here?
Good question. I assume what we're going to find is that this is going to drag out. And given that, what's the path forward? I'm not sure there is one. Yeah. We lose faith now.
Yeah. There's a couple of other things, obviously, that come in that can be used to pivot or change the discussion, right? So you've got the whole Luma thing, right? Obviously, it's the contract's being investigated. The chair of PREB is currently going through some analysis about whether he should have recused himself in the decision to approve the contract. This is not a new point. But it is something, it's a legal point that perhaps he should have recused himself. There's a lot of this to go on, but if they do end up making the transition, then you get a whole change of direction, right? A change of thinking, different people asking better questions. You've also got the debt that needs to be resolved and put through. That's going to be challenging. You know, any delays or other things could be attributed to that. That certainly fits with your thinking around this potentially all getting drawn out. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can compact the amount of RFPs over a shorter period of time, you know, and still hit your 2025, 2026 targets and satisfy the reasonable legal expectations and the expectations of voters. I think we have 5 years. It'll go fast.
So gaming that out under this provision, they really extended this bid for 2 years going forward before anything happens. So under your provision, we come up with a reasonable thing to bid on with some certainty and start putting sticks in the ground maybe next year.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I also think that I know they wanted to go for 1,000, and I wrote this up. The same thing is going for 1,000 up front sounds good. It gets people interested, but it's, you know, the 4,000 megawatts I'm rounding up that they want to go for it's a big offer. And it's something that people can look at and say, well, maybe I don't get it the first time, but there's enough here to eventually give me an interest in paying attention, learning about the market, finding ways that we can participate. 1,000 up front is really more political. I mean, if you're thinking about this rationally, especially with all of the premiums for bankruptcy and inefficiency and incompetence and lack of experience, which is the same side of that coin, you'd be better off doing like 250 up front and saving the 1,000 for the end. You're gonna be better prepared to integrate it. You get a much better pricing on it. Why do the biggest tranche when you're going to pay the biggest premium for that power that the people of Puerto Rico, customers of PREPA, are going to have to pay for years? You can juxtapose that with the cost of running the fossil fuel stations and getting these plants on and reducing that amount. But I strongly suspect that and I haven't done the analysis, but I strongly suspect that the large premiums that you're paying for power under these bids up front is like, wait 3 years to put it in, settle some of this stuff, the debt, more professional operations, more professional bid, greater clarity of outcome and process and understanding. And you could be paying half as much per megawatt in 5 years' time versus what you're likely to see now. And that's going to make a big difference in terms of overall cost and probably dwarf what you're kind of paying to keep some fossil fuel plants up and operating the next few years. It's not an environmental argument, but it is an economic one. Yeah.
You're postulating the no regret process. And that was something that they were talking about in the last meeting on microgrids. This no regret issue is really looming large because in a funny way, they don't really understand where to put this thing that we're talking about, whether it's 300 megawatts or 100 megawatts or 1,000 megawatts. They just don't know where to put it. So what are we doing? I don't know.
Yep.
Cart before the horse.
That too.
But don't
Yeah,
worry, don't worry, Ron. They'll issue the RFI after they get this off.
I like it.
It's the expression, one of Churchill's sayings that kind of applies to, I guess, Puerto Rico as much as it does to the Americans. He always said, you can always rely on the Americans to do the right thing, but only after they've tried absolutely everything else.
Yeah, eventually.
Yep. Anyway, we've come to the end of an hour and a half, and I think people are rightfully trying. This was a lot of fun. Thank you very much, everyone, and Ron. Thank you for coming on and being a guest.
And CP session for today, so he's good for the week.
Well, it just
Very
means
nice. Thanks for the invitation.
He'll vent a little less tomorrow. Yeah, Sean, it was good to see you and catch up. Yeah, I mean, happy to talk more at some point if you want to do it. But I figured this was probably an easier way to answer some of your questions. Thanks, everyone. This is Tom King, Energy Transformation Hour. Join us next month when we'll figure out who the heck we have on. But it should be fun as well.
All right.
Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.